Hello, and welcome to the office hours for the Reliable Web Summit for the CFP. I'm here with Joe Eames. My name is Brooke Avery, and we're excited to have everybody here.
Yep, very excited. Our first real event piece part of the Reliable Web Summit.
Yeah.
So,
In fact, do you kind of want to go over that a little bit? Kind of your vision for the Reliable. This is brand new. We've never done this before. But
yeah, let me give a brief introduction, and then depending on if we get any questions for our CFP, then we'll go over those questions. If not, we'll kind of go over some basic advice for people who are interested in submitting to the CFP, since that's the goal for today. And then we'll wrap up. So real briefly, the Reliable Web Summit is a brand new conference. It's going to be new this year, 2021, the first time it's ever been done. It's put on by the people who put on ng-conf, but it's not directly related to ng-conf in any way. It's a separate conference. Just similar, some of the same people are going to be involved in organizing the Reliable Web Conference, or Summit, Reliable Web Summit. So the big thing to understand about the Reliable Web Summit is really what it's about. What is the Reliable Web Summit about? The Reliable Web Summit is about building reliable web applications, websites, whatever you might want to call that. So we've basically tried to be concrete about what it means to talk about reliable web applications, because reliable is kind of a vague word, and it's subjective, it's definition. You could really say a lot of things are part of what it means to be reliable. So we've broken down to really three key pillars when it comes to building reliable web applications. The first one is kind of the most obvious one, which is scalability. Having an application that can scale based on usage is a really important part of being reliable. So scalability is pillar number one. Pillar number two is testability. So the ability to test your code, mostly we're focusing here on automated testing. So learning how to create testable applitions so that tests will tell you that your application is working, that it's doing what it's supposed to do. And then finally, code quality is the third pillar. And that's crafting good quality code, whether that means good architectures, designing good architectures, all the way down to just the micro level. What does a specific line of code mean to be crafted well, following patterns and practices and things like that. All of that stuff about writing good quality code, which for me is maybe one of the most exciting parts of this, is the opportunity to talk about what it means to write good code and produce maintainable, readable code. So this is really important because when we're evaluating for the CFP, we're going to be looking for talks that fit underneath one of these three areas, if not multiple of those areas. So talks should contribute to the knowledge of the attendees on how to build scalable applications, how to build testable applications, and how to build applications using good code quality. So that's what we're looking for talks that fit underneath one of these three banners, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's out there that could potentially fit underneath that. But if you have an idea for something that doesn't really quite fit underneath that, then maybe you rethink your idea.
Would you say that there's something under that? I mean, that's a pretty large umbrella, right? So is there something that you think are more of the hot topics that people may want to focus on? But alternatively, this is a question I know we hear sometimes, is it being talked about so much that I should be choosing a topic that's not such a hot topic right now, something that would be less common? What would you say to that kind of a question?
Yeah, that's good. A good question. When you look at conference topics, like what kind of topic actually fits within a conference, sometimes they're very vague, right? You might go to a JavaScript conference, and JavaScript's a very vague topic. In this case, Reliable Web is almost even more vague, more open, I would say, rather than vague, but more open than even that, right? So many things could fit underneath that. But you do have to look at your topic and decide, is your topic general or is it very specific? And kind of understand that. And then based on your understanding of picking a very specific topic. So let's talk about a couple of examples here. Let's say that you're looking at scalability, right? And so you have an idea for a talk, which is simply how to choose a scalable hosting provider, right? It's a nice, very vague subject or very general subject. There's so many things within that could apply, which is nice because it really fits well within the theme. But also, there might be a lot of talks that are submitted on a topic on something related to that, in which case your talk may line up closely against other talks, and now you're in a more competitive area. But if you pick something very, very, very niche, for example, how to use Lambda function, how to use Firebase Lambda functions with MongoDB to do blank, blank, blank. Very niche. But also the more niche something is, so theoretically, the smaller the potential audience for that is. And realize that we're looking here, you're going to have an audience that is very language agnostic. We're going to have members who are doing web development in traditional like JavaScript, full stack, but we're going to have people who mostly program in Java or Ruby or C# or Python, right? So very specific things tend to include the more specific you are, the larger the part of the audience that isn't necessarily going to benefit from your talk. And that doesn't mean that the talk won't get accepted by any means. It just means that you need to kind of understand that and understand that if you get too niche, you might get down to where the selection committee will look at a talk and say, maybe there's 5 people in the world that could benefit from a talk like that. So that's probably too niche to put on stage. But I think a good question to always ask yourself is, if somebody who isn't working with or isn't doing what I'm going to be talking about, if they heard this talk, would it still benefit them somehow? And that also applies more when you're talking about talks that are tool specific. Some talks are going to be tool specific, especially when you're talking about scalability. A lot of scalability is about specific tools, but a lot of talks can be very tool agnostic, right? What does it mean to craft a good quality test? Well, that's language agnostic and tool agnostic. That's valuable for anybody to hear, regardless of what language. But you can actually have a very niche topic underneath that. How to write really good asynchronous tests, right? Now you're getting more and more niche as you're moving along that. So those are things to keep in mind when thinking about what kind of a topic do you want to submit. But always at least make sure that you fall underneath those 3 pillars: scalability, testability, code quality.
Nice. And so I want to kind of piggyback off that, because one thing you mentioned was if you submit a talk and maybe 10 other people submitted something very much related to that. And so then as a selection committee, we're kind of going, great, these all look like excellent talks, but how do we choose the one out of all 10? Right. So we've kind of said this at other office hour events, but I've already seen a handful of the applicants who've submitted talks. They've been putting in one case 4 different applications. I think, and even we just got through doing a lightning talk selection for ng-conf 2021. We had one guy turn in 6 applications. So, and that was exactly, one reason he got selected, because 5 of his topics were all on things that other people had submitted on as well. But he had one that was just so unique that it was like, oh, that's where you'll fit in. So that would be something I would suggest, is taking the time to submit 2 or 3 or 4, if you can, and just put yourself out there in different areas, increase your chances.
Gotcha. Yeah, I agree totally with that. I think one thing that is nice for a selection committee is, rather than giving like a very vague idea and saying, I could do this in a lot of different ways, it's nice to perhaps submit that same idea multiple times, but only when it's really meaningful. So for example, you might have a talk idea that you thought to yourself, hey, I could do this in 5 minutes, or I could do this in 30 minutes. If the talk is pretty much the same talk, whether it's 5 minutes or 30 minutes, and there's not too much difference between the two, then submitting it once and then indicating, this could be anywhere from this could be either a 5-minute talk or a 30-minute talk. But if you have the same topic idea, but it's very different, if it's 5 minutes, it's going to be something like this is going to be very different than when it's 30 minutes, then maybe submit that talk idea twice, right? And show this is this is what I'm thinking for when I'm doing it. This is a 5-minute version. This is what I'm thinking if I did this as a 30-minute version. Makes it easier for the selection committee to understand and even look at the two different talks against each other and pick them against each other. I also want to say that it isn't necessarily true that normally we would only select somebody to talk once, but we're doing a multi-track conference. Reliable Web will have multiple tracks. So if theoretically you could be selected to give two talks if you submitted 2 great talk ideas or more, and we really liked 2 of them and wanted to pick 2 of them, we would probably communicate with you and make sure you're okay wanting to do actually and prepare 2 different talks, especially if they were shorter. Like 2 5-minute talks would be easier to select than 2 45-minute talks, right? Because there's a lot more work generally that goes into a longer talk. So that's something to keep in mind. I also think it's important to keep in mind that even if you submit on a topic that's very general and potentially going to be common, that still doesn't mean that we would only select one talk from that area, right? If you wanted to submit a talk about, let's say, Netlify. I think Netlify is a good tool that a lot of people are talking about right now, and or maybe a talk about Jamstack, right? Just kind of an overview of Jamstack. We might have multiple talks about Jamstack. We probably would have multiple talks about Jamstack, and that's okay. So those are all kind of things to think in mind, but I think it's also very good to not be too vague in, ultimately a lesson here is don't be too vague in your submissions. Don't say, well, I could talk about how to use Netlify. Don't do that. Come up with a real talk title, come up with a real description for the talk. And if you have 4 ideas that are variations on that and they're different enough, then submit the talk idea 4 times. I myself, when I really want to speak at a conference, I'll sometimes come up with 2, 3, 4 ideas and submit all those 4 ideas if I really want to speak at a particular conference.
Nice. We do have one question here from Dohan. He says he's unable to listen in, but wanted to ask our thoughts about a talk that he's given at local meetups. And so he's wondering if this would be good on a, higher conference level type thing. So he says minimal mean full stack TypeScript. Is that something that would be Reliable Web Summit material or not quite?
The second part, you in the title, focuses on good coding practices and TDD. That right there absolutely fits exactly within what we were looking for with Reliable Web. I would say the title, I'm not 100% clear if the title is minimal mean full stack TypeScript, or if the title is both sentences. I assume it's just minimal mean full stack TypeScript, which by itself doesn't, I don't think, convey the focus on good coding practices and TDD. So I would recommend reworking the title to be something like more about indicate how to craft good code and TDD with full stack TypeScript, right? Even though minimal mean is actually a really nice, the alliteration makes it kind of a nice title. That by itself, because it doesn't convey what is important about or applicable to Reliable Web, I don't think it would be. I think it would be better if you actually conveyed that in the talk title. What does this mean to that? And then that also lets the audience potentially know, oh, you're going to be talking about how to use TDD with TypeScript. That's very interesting to me, right?
One thing I think that brings up a really good point is the talk title, because so many times we see talk titles and they're really long. People get lost in that. So I'd kind of like to hear what your thoughts are on making talk titles, but to me, the ones that stand out are they're just more brief to the point. They can be clever, as well. It's not to say that you can't get kind of clever and fun with it, but the longer they get, it just doesn't, it just doesn't work as well. So I don't know. Do you have like a secret sauce for making talk titles? Some kind of rules that you follow?
Not really. The classic things, throw some alliteration. Is sometimes nice. Come up with something clever, something that's topical, or a reference to things that's maybe geeky, but in the end a clear talk title that describes what you're doing is probably the most important thing. If I do have one piece of advice, there's one particular type of talk title to stay away from. And that is, if you're talking about 3 things in your talk, don't do the blank X and Y and Z, comma, oh my, right? The this and that, oh my. That is such an overused. Yeah, that thing, that is so overused that, at least for me, when I sit on selection committees, I hate seeing that talk title. And if I do end up falling in love with the talk and want it, I usually almost always go back to the person and ask them to change the talk title to something that's not so overused.
Yeah.
So that would be my one suggestion. But I think that it's most important to be clear and concise, and that's hard. And so we also say a lot, spend time on your title, just the title. Potentially the title is the most important part of selling your talk to a selection committee, right? Having a great description and saying a bunch of stuff is awesome, but I can tell you for sure, when you've been in a selection, when you've been doing selections for 3 hours and you're tired, you're hungry, and it's just about to be lunchtime, you can sometimes gloss over some of the details that people write into their descriptions. So the title always sticks out. It always sticks out. So be clear, be concise, convey exactly what your talk is going to, or the best to your ability, convey what the talk is going to be about. Or have something so clever that people absolutely are interested to read the description to understand what your talk is actually about. Here's an interesting example from our last conference. There was a talk title called Scully, Scully, Bobully, Banana, Banana, Full Folly.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely said almost nothing about what the talk was about, other than it was about Scully, which is a Jamstack technology for Angular. But other than that, it didn't talk at all what it was about, didn't convey at all what it was about. But it was just so unusual and clever. I've never seen, like, in all the conferences I've been to, even though that's a common phrase, I've never seen anybody actually use that phrase. So I thought that was pretty clever and pretty nice for somebody to put that in. And I thought that made it very interesting for people to say, well, what's this talk going to be about? And,
we had one, it was a lightning talk, and I thought it was pretty clever as well. The whole thing ended up being themed. It was Dave Shevitz, who's on the Angular team, and I think he's the team lead for the documentation. But his talk title was Be Elated, Keep Content Updated. And the whole thing was Dr. Seuss themed. The whole talk was in rhyme, and it's super clever, just, but it still conveys what's going to be in that talk. It's not so clever and so, like you said, niche, that people would go at it, like look at it and go, what is that? Like, you can still get the point by reading the title. Okay, so now take that to the next part of submitting a talk. With the description, what kind of advice can you give people there? How long should it be? How short should it be? How many details? Should they do a bullet point list of what they want to cover? Or what do you feel like is the best way to submit the description?
Good question. Definitely not a novel, right? The longer it is, this is true of pretty much everything that you write anywhere. And understand really what you're doing when you submit a CFP is you're marketing your talk, right? And always with marketing, the more text is, after a certain point, is bad. The less text you write, the more that the text that you do write is going to be read and really understood. The more text that you write, you think that you're conveying more things, but in reality, you're filling the reader's head with more and more and more facts, and it's hard to keep them all in there and really understand what you're going about. So if I could give general advice, I would say something like 4 to 8 sentences is probably an ideal number of words to use, regardless. And then potentially you could use formatting, like bullet points is nice because bullet points are very readable. Even cut it into 2 or 3 pieces, 4 pieces maybe. If you end up needing to write 500 or 800 words to really describe your talk, that's probably too much. So try to keep it, I think in that length is ideal. That doesn't mean that more than that or less than that is bad and hurts you, but I think that's like an ideal. If you can convey what you're talking about in that what you're going to cover in that 4 to 8 sentences range, it makes it pretty quick to read and understand what you're going to do without getting overwhelmed by the details. So again, you should spend time on your talk description, figure out, don't just sit down and just stream of consciousness. Well, this is what I'm going to totally go over. And it's just, you're vomiting on in the description. But instead, every thought that you have in your head about what you might do, what you're doing, and also what you're laying out. And in addition to that, I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this, to try to sound very flexible, right? Try to keep it concise and straightforward. And if you do have flexibility, try to fit it into that, ideal length in there so that it can be read. Even a couple of sentences is great if that's enough time.
So just highlighting the key takeaways,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
I think another thing a lot of people are curious about, they ask is, I don't know that I am skilled enough. I really want to get in and share my talk, but I just don't know that I'm quite at that level. So if there was someone who was in that position, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, there's always the general, vague, banal advice of, still give it a try, right? Always step off the cliff, and it's okay to suck at things when you first try them out, and because you get better over time. Even if you do give a terrible talk, that's okay. I can tell you, I've given a lot of talks myself, and I've given a lot of terrible talks. And that's just part of it. But that being said, how to best deal with that really right now when you're in the moment, right? That's sort of a long-term view of things, how to deal with that right now. First off, as your conference organizers, we want to help. We want you to come and give a talk. And if you have a great idea for a talk, we want you to give it, and we want you to give the best possible talk that you can. So we're here to assist with that. Whether that means help writing your CFP, we're here to assist with help writing your CFP. Please reach out to us. What's our email address? Is it info@reliablewebsummit.com?
Yes, exactly.
info@reliablewebsummit.com. Email us and ask for help. We'd love to help you out, help you work through your CFP to make sure that your submission is the best possible submission you can have. So that's one. Two, when you are selected, we do have resources to help you out, whether that's from speaker training to helping you with the recording process, because these are going to be this conference is online. It's going to be pre-recorded talks, so helping you out with that to make the best presentation, giving you feedback on your talk as you do it. We're here to help you out with a lot of that. So even if it is a first-time talk, understand that you won't just be left alone and have to do it all on your own. We're here to help with the process of getting that talk done, and we can really. It's amazing to me how often we offer this help and how little people take us up on it. But we really are here. We want you to produce a great talk, and we want to help out with that effort.
I think it's also a relative question, though. Like you may not feel like you know a lot, but compared to who, right? I mean, how many people are just getting into programming, and how many of those people would benefit from knowing the things that you know? And sure, you may not know as much as some of the other people in your office or whatever, but you probably know more than you're giving yourself credit for, and definitely more than other people who are newer. So,
right.
I think if you have that desire to share something, I don't think you should hold back just because you don't feel like I'm not skilled enough. I think you have something to share, and it could just be that you present it in a way that other people, it finally clicks for them. Maybe they've heard that 12 times, but the way that you present it, the way that you go about it is that final time that just like it opens up their eyes. So I would say go for it anyway.
Yeah, I think there's also one solid piece of advice that I would give. This is what I do whenever I prepare a talk to give at a conference is I always try to find 1 or 2 meetups to give that talk to in preparation for the actual event. And then I also run through the talk. Now, since we're doing pre-recorded, it does actually give you a little bit, you're not live. And honestly, that is a good part, is if you really do want to start doing talks at conferences, but you're very nervous about it, a pre-recorded talk is so much nicer because you can give it, and then if you don't like it, you can give it again, right? And you can give it 5 times until you have one that you're really happy with. And we should probably talk about production quality and expectations as well after this, but I like to practice is very important. And if you have a talk, theoretically, that's the first time you've given that talk. So it shouldn't be the first time you give it when you actually give it at the conference. When you're doing it live, that's especially important. But even when you're doing it pre-recorded, find an actual audience. Easiest thing is a local meetup. Meetups are always looking for people to come and give talks, and go give the talk and practice it. And I try to do it at least 2 times. And so sometimes it's hard because there's not enough local meetups. So I might give it once to a local meetup, and then I might give it once to like a family member who's completely bored out of their mind, has no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right. Or a friend. Right. But then practice it that way. But I'm able to practice timing and my delivery. And it really helps, even if it doesn't seem like it's going to help. Give that talk once, ideally twice, before you actually truly deliver the talk. And so since I've mentioned it, we should probably talk about like production quality when we're talking about pre-recorded talks. So we're not expecting you to produce like a YouTube video that's polished with lots of editing and stuff like that. What we really want is a recording of as if you were on stage giving the talk, with flubs, with mispronunciations, with all of that, right? So that means that if you are in and you make a mistake and you say something wrong, that's fine. Don't stop the recording and try to edit it out or anything like that. Just give it as if you were standing up on the stage, because on the stage you can't pause your live presentation. That's what we want. We want you to just sit there and give your talk. And if it's not like the most polishing, that's actually okay. But the nice thing is you can do it, and then when you're done, you can evaluate it and say, did I give it well? Did I look at the right place? Did I say things in the right time? Or did I take too long or too short? And if you're not happy, you can try it again and re-record it again. But we really want you to just sit down and, for the most part, record the whole thing front to back. Now, some people love doing the editing and the video process and all that sort of stuff, so they do come up with these crazy, highly edited videos, and that's okay too. If that's what you want to do, that's totally fine to do that as well, and do a highly edited video. But in the end, the simple, straightforward video of just, I'm going to sit down and just give my talk live, as if it was live, but it's getting recorded, with mistakes, with flubs, with the realism of giving a live talk. And that's really what we're looking for.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. So we do have another question over here from Drew. And he's kind of going back to that question I asked about, I just don't know that I have the skills. So should I submit? And he's saying he's kind of on the fence about it. And he says, if given a subject to focus on and the time that we have before submissions are due, he feels like he could study and build a presentation that would fit that need. So is there, are there topics that you think would just be knockout topics for Reliable Web Summit? Something that he could really narrow in on and study and, be prepared for here in the next 2 weeks?
Well, me personally, this is mostly a selfish thing. I really hope that we get a lot of talks about what it means to write quality code. So if I was going to suggest to somebody a topic, and I think it's actually a hard topic because it's vague and it's not nearly as well defined as the other two things, testability and writing things about automated testing. We had another question here about the range of topics. So for those who've jumped in the middle, let me revisit that really quick. Reliable Web Summit is built on 3 pillars of building reliable web applications: scalability, testability, and code quality. So every talk that we look for, we want to fit under one or potentially multiple of those umbrellas. So of those 3 things, I think that code quality is potentially the one we're going to see the least number of submissions on, which I hope that that's not true. And I hope we actually have the most submissions on that and maybe the most talks, because for me, that's the thing that's most interesting in the long term in my career, is how do I actually just write good code? And it's something that spans technologies and tools and languages, etc. So I saw a very interesting YouTube video that I watched from one of the channels that I subscribe to, which was just somebody saying, here's why you should don't use the else statement. And he walked through some examples of if, else, and why not to use it, and how to not use it in some scenarios. Great talk about code quality. This is just how to write more readable, better quality code. So I would suggest something like that as topics to focus on. But in the case of Drew, maybe Drew, you don't feel confident. I actually love the topic of code quality because I think that everybody ultimately feels like they could write better code. And so anybody's perspective can oftentimes be a benefit to others. So I would suggest that topic, but maybe there's something else underneath testability or scalability that might be interest you more, in which case that's great. But let me also say another thing. When I've given plenty of talks that I submitted those talks on topics that I didn't feel like I knew very well and wasn't at all an expert in, because I wanted the opportunity to learn that topic and give a talk on that topic. Recent example, RxJS Live, which was like 18 months ago. In RxJS, which is an Angular, I felt like I didn't understand error handling at all. And so I thought that was also a topic I've never seen anybody talk about. So I submitted a talk on that and it was accepted. And so I went and I gave a talk on how to do error handling in RxJS. And I had to spend all this time researching what does it mean to do error handling in RxJS and what are the ways to do it. And I learned a ton for myself, which was great. And then I got to give a talk. So I love picking topics, and you got to be smart about that. Can you really learn that topic in the time given well enough? Is it something that you truly can learn well enough to give a talk on? That's awesome. But you also don't have to be the world's expert. If somebody looks at my talk and was like, well, you missed this and this, and you could have done this better, that's totally okay. That's not the point of giving a talk. The point of giving a talk is to benefit the people who listen. And if they know more than you, then they're going to already know more than you. And maybe what you say isn't going to benefit them. But for everybody that knows less than you, they're going to benefit. I heard this described one way that I love, which is if you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 in some topic and you say, man, I'm only a 3, right? So people don't want to listen to me. Well, guess what? The lower the number is, the more people are on that level. So if you're a 3, maybe half the people out there that are interested in that topic are a 1 or a 2. So giving a talk at a 3 level of competence still benefits everybody who's a 1 or a 2, and probably half the people that are out there. By the time you're done preparing that talk to give it a level 3 in that subject, you might then have given yourself enough knowledge, you'd rate yourself as more as a 4 or a 5, right? Nothing's better to learn a subject than to teach it. So no matter if you don't feel like you're an expert in something, if it interests you, then be willing to just take that jump and give a talk on something.
Yeah, and so one thing I put there in the chat also is come up with some topics that it's kind of hard to say because we don't know exactly what your strengths are or even what your interests are. Maybe, like Joe said, it's not currently a strength, but it'd be something that you're interested in learning more about. What I would do is just come up with a list of potential topics and email that to us and just ask for our guidance on, of these 10 or of these 5, which one or which ones do you think I should submit a talk on? So we would love to help in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But Joe, you mentioned something because you kind of referenced back to, we keep talking about Angular specifically, and I just want to ask this just to make sure that people understand. Is this just for Angular? Is the Reliable Web Summit only Angular?
No, in fact, we will not be necessarily accepting any talks that are Angular specific. I kind of discussed before that in the 3 pillars that we're talking about, one of the pillars, scalability, has a lot to do with specific tools and techniques, and that's great. But what we are looking for is things that are applicable to the wider audience in general. So when it comes to, hey, I want to give a talk about how to use like Lambda functions on AWS to create scalable web applications, that's potentially applicable to a wide variety of people. But if you want to give a talk specifically about Angular, right, that's theoretically going to be likely applicable to a very small number of people. And people who don't do Angular may not be able to benefit at all from a talk. But people who don't do AWS may be able to benefit from a talk about AWS Lambda functions because it may be applied to something else, or they might use AWS in the future. So those are things to keep in mind, but we are definitely not looking, we're looking for talks that aren't, some tools are okay because they're about scalability to talk about a specific tool. Again, a specific hosting provider or scalability tool that's related to scalability, that's definitely an okay talk. But if the tool is something that isn't directly related to the topic, right? Picking a front-end framework. Front-end frameworks are essentially the same from each other when it comes to being able to, are they testable? Can you write good code, right? Are they scalable? Yes, they're all kind of applicable to each other. So again, language specific talks also. If you want to give a talk specific to Python, is potentially less likely to get accepted than a talk about a specific tool provider whose tool gives new scalability options, right? So it's things to keep in mind. It's definitely not about Angular. The topics are not about Angular, and we would encourage people to not make their talks Angular specific or any other framework specific, and when possible, not language specific. That's a lot harder to do. And it is okay to pick a default language. I would highly recommend JavaScript. I think that's, since it's a reliable web conference, JavaScript is likely to be the language that everybody has in common. So if you need to do something, you need to show language examples. If you can show them in JavaScript, that's potentially the best language to choose, but trying to be less language specific outside of, again, JavaScript, because at least that's the universal language for the web.
Okay.
All right. Well, do we have any? We're hitting a little bit over half an hour. No reason to keep going on for too long. I think we kind of hit the major points that we want to talk about. So, do we have any final questions from anybody that happened to be tuning in? If not, it might be a good time to wrap up. Well, Brooke, thanks for being here and helping make this happen. And thanks
Always
to those who showed up and asked some questions. We're glad to be here. And again, if you do have any further questions, we're happy to answer those questions just by emailing our info account, info@reliablewebsummit.com. Email us. We're happy to answer questions and hopefully get your creative juices flowing, come up with some awesome talk ideas, and hopefully we'll see a large variety of really great talks.
And again, the CFP is due on May 15th by the end of the day. So that gives you about 2 weeks from when this is airing. But yeah, I put the email address in the chat. So if anybody needs it, it's right there. But yeah, we hope to see your submissions. Let us know if you have any questions. All right. Thanks, everybody.